Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, I should say. I want to acknowledge, firstly, we're on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nation. And I want to start by thanking and acknowledging every worker who's on shift right now, providing critical services for British Columbians. Of course, healthcare workers, janitorial staff, first responders, truck drivers, utility workers, to the people that worked at our grocery stores and our ports and providing critical childcare for those critical employees in the workplace. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart on behalf of all British Columbians for providing those critical services at this extraordinary time. COVID-19 touches all of our lives, and it also touches our economy. Dr. Bonnie Henry has given us specific direction in how we can slow the spread of this virus, how we should conduct ourselves when we interact with other people in the community, and these steps are critically important to protect our health. They must be adhered to, they must be followed. But I also think every day about the single parent who's concerned about having to leave work to care for a child or a loved one. I'm concerned about those other workers in the workplace who don't know whether they should be at work. Are they providing a critical service? Low and middle income families who are concerned that missing a paycheck, missing two paychecks, means that they're going to fall further behind with their monthly payments. Small business owners who don't know whether they should keep their staff, how will they keep their staff, how long will this last? Hospitality workers concerned that they may well be able to access programs at this point in time, but how are they going to go forward when no one is going to restaurants? The tourism economy is slowing to a halt. How will that affect them? How will self-employed people with a modest background also be able to get by without the significant social safety net other hourly employees often have? So this is stressful, no question about that. But people need help now. Businesses need help now. And that's why we're focusing today on announcing our action plan for the economy. In a moment, I'll ask Minister James to go through the details, but the high-level discussion is a $5 billion action plan, $2.8 billion focused on people and services, $2.2 billion focused on businesses and recovery going forward. If we are going to get through this very, very difficult issue for all British Columbians, all Canadians, and indeed all citizens of the world, we have to focus on making sure that the most vulnerable in our community are protected. So the first steps we're going to focus on with the action plan, making sure that critical funding for health services is there now and going forward. Direct financial support for people is in the package, as well as deferment of payments, and Carole will outline those, and indeed targeted tax relief as well. Parts of the plan will take effect right away, and other parts will take more time. There has to be a way forward. There has to be hope as we get through these difficult, challenging times. We've been focusing in government, of course, on daily briefings from Minister Dix, daily briefings from Dr. Bonnie Henry. Minister Farnworth, responsible for emergency preparedness, has made it abundantly clear that emergency legislation, emergency protections here in BC can and will be implemented. And I'm going to ask Carole in a moment to talk about how we will finance all of this going forward. It seems inconceivable that just over a month ago, we tabled a balanced budget. It seems inconceivable that just over a month ago, this room would have been filled with cameras and journalists asking questions. And today we're all gathered looking forward. What can we, as a group of people here on the north coast of North America, with the Pacific on one side of us, the Rocky Mountains on another, the United States below us, and the great Yukon and Northwest Territories above us, how can we, in all of this sea of humanity, 7 billion souls, how can the 5 million of us work together, pull together to make sure we all come out the other end of this as well as we possibly can? Today's package includes support for renters. It's going to be there to ensure that no one will be evicted because of COVID-19. We're attempting to deliver these programs while we're developing them. And I want to just emphasize that for a minute for those who are watching at home. Extraordinary need, without doubt. Extraordinary people within the public service, within the private sector, all coming together to come up with plans on a way forward, not just for the day-to-day, but for the next week, the next month, the next 2 months. That's what you expect from your government. That's what you expect from those in the business community that are there asking me every day, how can we help? We can help by listening to Dr. Henry. We can help by ensuring that we're doing everything we can to separate ourselves, appropriate physical distance, making sure that we isolate if we don't have to be in the workforce, and ensuring all the while that we're caring for our neighbours when they need that help. Today, we will have an extraordinary session of the Legislative Assembly. 12 members from across British Columbia will be in the legislative session to pass two pieces of legislation. Firstly, employment standards legislation to make sure that no worker loses their job because they're self-isolating or caring for a sick one in the family. This cooperation across party lines has been quite extraordinary, and I want to thank all members of the legislature for putting aside partisanship absolutely and unequivocally so we can focus on working on this together. Our system is based on an adversarial relationship between government and opposition, and that's as it should be. But in extraordinary times, extraordinary measures are required. And I'm grateful to the BC Liberals and the BC Greens for their approach to this process as being one of conciliation, one of how can we all work together to get this done. Finally, Carole will be, or Minister James, I'm sorry for being so familiar. I'm really familiar with her. Minister James will be laying out a supply bill that will fund the programs that we're putting in place to make sure that we're there for people today, we're there for businesses today, and that all of us come out of this at the other end stronger as a result of that effort. I firmly believe that working together, all of us will get through this. But we need to be kind, we need to be considerate, we need to be thoughtful, but we also need to ensure that we're taking the direction that Dr. Henry is providing for us so that we can be safe, we can protect those that are vulnerable, and get through this better off. And I'll ask Carole now to go through the details of the action plan.
Thank you so much, Premier. And I want to begin by recognizing we're on the traditional territory of the Esquimalt and Songhees people and thank them for the ability to meet on their land. Before I get into the details of the COVID-19 action plan, I also want to take a moment to express my gratitude to everyone working on the front line, including doctors, nurses, care aides, paramedics. I want to thank all those people who are keeping our community going, including grocery clerks, transit drivers, municipal, provincial, and federal workers. I want to express my incredible gratitude for people who are helping each other stay safe and showing compassion for their neighbors. I want to thank businesses who are being so diligent to help stop the spread of the virus. And I also want to express my appreciation to the government and opposition MLAs who are also working as part of the COVID-19 Seniors Working Group and have gone beyond and above to be able to find ways for volunteer networks to support seniors safely across our province. And finally, thank you to all members of the legislature and members of the media and the press who are keeping British Columbians informed. For us in government, knowing that there's a community of people and professionals throughout the province who are working hard to address health and safety has made it possible for us to turn our minds to helping the people and the businesses who are struggling with the effects of COVID-19 pandemic as quickly as we can. Recently, as you know, our federal counterparts outlined their COVID-19 response fund for healthcare and an economic response fund to be able to help Canadians get through the pandemic. BC COVID-19 Action Plan, which I'm going to outline today, builds on that work and fills in some very specific gaps for British Columbia. It's a $5 billion plan, as the Premier has said, that addresses some of the immediate needs of British Columbians and businesses. I want to emphasize that this plan is a starting point. It's going to have to evolve as the situation evolves. And we are going to do everything we need to keep British Columbians safe, healthy, and supported, and to keep our economy strong. So to begin that work and to talk about the specifics, I've committed $1.7 billion in investments for critical services. This funding is going to be put to use in the weeks and months ahead to ensure that people have the services and supports they need, including funding to address the major healthcare pressures our province is facing, funding for investment in housing and shelters, including support for tenants struggling to pay rent, looking at rental support programs, funding to support those on income and disability assistance and our most vulnerable people, support for individuals and families who've been affected by this pandemic, and support for businesses who have been hard hit during this crisis. We know that there are people now who are unable to work and need help paying their rent and bills. I'm sure others have heard these concerns, as we have, from people across the province. Workers who are sick or quarantined or isolated, who've been laid off. Parents who are having to stay home from work because schools are closed, and those who are caring for sick family members. Our COVID-19 action plan allocates $1.1 billion in funding to provide relief to workers and their families. A new BC emergency benefit for workers will provide a one-time tax-free $1,000 payment to workers in British Columbia whose ability to work has been affected by the outbreak. This benefit will be available to British Columbians eligible for employment insurance as a result of COVID-19's impact, eligible for the new federal emergency care benefit, and eligible for the new federal emergency support benefit. So this will add to benefits that are received under those federal supports. The BC Emergency Benefit for Workers will support EI eligible workers, as well as those who may not qualify for EI, including non-EI eligible workers who become laid off, non-EI eligible workers who are sick or quarantined, including those who are self-employed, non-EI eligible workers who are taking care of a family member who is sick, such as an elderly parent, and also parents whose children require care or supervision because of childcare or school closures and are unable to earn employment insurance, whether they qualify for employment insurance or not. So this payment works in concert with the federal measures so that people affected by COVID-19 crisis have the swift support they need to provide for themselves and their families. Now, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic affects everyone differently, and that could include lost income or additional costs. That's why we're looking at a second measure to work to offset some of these costs with further support through a top-up to the BC Climate Action Tax Credit. This enhanced credit will go to 86% of individuals and families in our province. It will provide up to $218 for adults and up to $64 per child. This enhanced payment builds on the regular BC Climate Action Tax Credit payment, which provides $43.50 per adult and $12.75 per child. So once people have filed their 2019 tax returns and determined they're eligible for the credit, a family of 4 will receive $564 in July. Combined with the federal credit and benefit enhancements, British Columbians will have a little bit more fiscal security over this time of uncertainty. For people who are worried about making rent, I want to talk a little bit about the housing security piece. People who are out of work or off the job are worried about paying their rent. They're worried about details on how to support them. And we're looking right now at those details. We're exploring things like expanding the existing SAFER, a supplement for seniors, or the RAP program, rent supplements for people who are working poor. That would provide an opportunity, again, with expanded criteria for people to be able to get supports. You will have heard on the weekend that we've halted all evictions for BC Housing funded buildings. And I have to say I'm incredibly encouraged by stories of landlords like Port Living in Vancouver who've already taken steps to pause evictions of tenants, taking that step of kindness at a time when we need it the most. I'm hopeful that other landlords will show the same respect for their tenants in these extraordinary times. For homeowners, Canada's banks and credit unions are working to pause mortgage and loan payments for those in need, and to help seniors stay at home safely and ensure that they have the help they need, we are adding $50 million to the United Way to support them and expand their network in programs such as Better at Home. Better at Home is a program, for those of you who don't know, that helps seniors with simple day-to-day tasks like grocery shopping, yard work. It helps address social isolation so they can continue to live independently in their own homes and yet remain connected to their communities. Around the province, we all rely on a network of program and service delivery agencies, many who are not-for-profit, who deliver important social services. These agencies, like childcare providers, will continue to receive that funding. Payments will continue to flow even if they must temporarily close or experience other operational disruptions. In addition, there are cases where ministries will provide additional funding to address increased costs for essential service agencies so they can continue their operations. Last week, you heard the federal government announce a freeze on Canada student loan payments and interest accrual for 6 months. As of March 30th, 2020, BC will follow suit. All student loan payments, which are already interest-free in British Columbia, will be paused until September 30th, 2020, so that people will be better able to care for themselves. BC Hydro and ICBC will also be working with their customers to provide increased support and understanding during this crisis. BC Hydro clients can defer their bill payments or arrange for flexible payment plans with no penalty. For those people struggling in the face of reduced income, they can now defer their hydro bills, and they can use BC Hydro's Customer Crisis Fund, which offers up to $600. ICBC will be working to offer more driver license renewals online or over the phone, so fewer people have to go in person. And customers on a monthly auto plan payment may be able to defer their payments as well for up to 90 days with no penalty. We all know that everything's changing rapidly. We're worried for the well-being of our family, our friends, and our community, and that includes businesses across this province. These are difficult times. Businesses, small and large, are struggling to find ways to keep their doors open and look after their employees. I want businesses to know that we're here to support you as we get on the path to recovery. To reduce the pressure on businesses, we will be deferring many of the provincial tax filing and payment deadlines to September 30th, 2020. That includes payment of provincial sales tax, municipal and regional district tax, carbon tax, motor fuel tax, tobacco tax, and the employer's health tax. We're also delaying the expansion of the PST registration requirements announced in Budget 2020. Specifically, that would be the PST on e-commerce services and on sweetened carbonated drinks. We're also delaying the increase of the carbon tax, which was due to increase on April 1st, 2020. And we're going to review the timing of all these taxes by September 30th, 2020. To further support cash flow for businesses, commercial and industrial properties in Class 4, 5, or 6 are going to have their tax cut rate cut in half for the 2020 tax year. That will be a cost of $500 million to fund this relief. Tax savings, for example, for the average urban commercial property owner is going to be about $4,000. We do expect that these savings will flow through to tenants who have triple net leases, providing support to them as well. One key area that we are prioritizing is the hard-hit tourism, hospitality, and cultural sectors. So we built into our plan support, details to come, to help the tourism, the arts and culture sectors survive the immediate crisis and also to help them come back strong in the future. These are some of the immediate steps the government is taking to build on the federal aid package and support British Columbians today. But we're also looking to the future. The COVID-19 pandemic is a massive global disruption. It's affecting each and every one of us. BC's economic sectors, industries, and businesses are feeling the impact, and we know they are struggling. Our government will be establishing a recovery task force that will include representatives from BC's business and labour sectors. And to make sure that people know that we are serious about this recovery, we've set aside $1.5 billion to plan for the province's recovery. When we start seeing signs of that recovery, this funding will help provide stimulus where it's needed the most, encourage investment throughout the province and with our international partners, and further develop BC's competitiveness. So to conclude, the COVID-19 Action Plan focuses on 3 specific areas: protecting the health and safety of British Columbians and the people on the front lines of this crisis, bringing in immediate relief for people and businesses in our province and coordinating with the federal initiatives. And beginning to lay the foundation for BC's economic recovery in partnership with business and labour. Each of these areas reflect our government's focus on creating a strong, sustainable economy that works for the people of this province. I want to acknowledge, as the Premier has done, that this plan is a first step, but a critical step. I want to thank particularly the public service and the staff who are working overtime to pull together the measures in this action plan and respond to the challenges and immediate needs created by COVID-19. We know there's more to do. The pandemic will present extraordinary hurdles for all of us, but we are in this together. Your government has your back. I want to wrap up by recognizing these are difficult times, but they're also incredibly heartwarming examples from people all over our province who are supporting each other. UBC nursing and medical students who are banding together to do things like grocery shopping and errands and pet care for hardworking physicians and nurses, making sure that those tasks make their lives a little bit easier during these difficult times. Commercial property owners who are waiving their tenants' rent so businesses can keep paying their staff. Servers at local restaurants who were given food to take home before their doors were shut. Communities banding together to make sure that everyone in their neighbourhood has the supplies they need. British Columbians, no surprise, are giving each other the support we need to make it through this crisis. So let's keep the thoughtfulness and the compassion going as we tackle these challenges together. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We are going to take a few questions. We're going to start with the phone first. Please, as a reminder, everyone waiting to ask a question on the phone, please unmute your phones now. You won't be audible until we call your name. And we're going to start with Richard Zisman first.
Premier, to those who are worried about paying rent and affording to keep their homes with mortgages as well, can you speak specifically about what is here to help them and provide some clarity? Is there a ban on all evictions in British Columbia?
Well, I'll start at the end and go forward, Richard. There is, no one will lose their apartment because of COVID-19. That's not to say that there are not tenants who are in various stages of with their landlord for other reasons that have nothing to do with the pandemic, and those will continue. Minister Robinson is making a presentation to Cabinet on Wednesday, and then she'll make public the details of our action plan components with respect to renters. Minister James talked about working with financial institutions and the federal government to ensure on the mortgage side that relief is there. I know that there are still issues to be resolved, and that's why it's so critically important that all orders of government, federal, provincial, and municipal, are working as best we can to ensure common language on program delivery, as well as reinforcing again the directives from public health officials about how we should conduct ourselves within our families, within our communities, within our businesses. And when it comes to rent, this is a fundamental issue for so many British Columbians. I asked Spencer Chandra Herbert, the MLA for West End, who did an exhaustive review on the rent economy in British Columbia that presented to us last year. I asked him to kickstart that. He did a rapid consultation through his Rolodex, his contacts on his phone to talk to tenants groups, to talk to landlord organizations. He's presented that material to Minister Robinson. We'll be discussing it on Wednesday, and the results of that will be made available at that time.
Next, we're going to Rob Shaw.
Well, hi, Premier and Minister. I just wondered if you could talk a bit about settling on the $1,000 tax-free payment to people. How did we get to that number instead of $2,000 or $5,000 or $500, or what is the significance of that figure?
Hi, Rob. It's Carole James. I just wanted to make sure, as we looked at immediate supports, that we could get something out right now. It doesn't mean that we don't believe that there may be additional supports needed later. We want to, as much as we can, coordinate with the federal government when it comes to their payments that are going out as well. That's why you see a second payment coming in July on the climate action credit. But getting the $1,000 out now to be able to provide support, as you may know EI doesn't provide full wage replacement. We know that many people were put in the situation of being laid off quickly, and we wanted to get dollars to them quickly. So we felt $1,000 can contribute towards the pressures that they are facing. Another payment coming in July. Remember as well, the federal government is putting payments in place, so they're looking at a GST credit that may come in April. So again, we tried to time the payments so that people were getting supports in each of the months between the federal payments and the provincial payments. So looking at filling gaps where they were there, and we felt $1,000 was a reasonable approach as a start.
Next up, we have Justine Hunter.
Oh, hi. Premier, you and Carole James both talked about thanking the public servants who helped put all this together. But there's also some considerable angst. I think teachers, for example, on the weekend were told they can only be assured a paycheck until the end of April. I'm just wondering what your message is to the public sector right now.
Well, broadly speaking, my message to the public sector is the same as the private sector. We need to ensure that we're all in this together. That's why we put in place a package to complement the work that's already been done by the federal government as a starting point, and we see where we go from here. We're going to have to manage issues as they emerge. The education sector is one of those sectors, forestry, and the list goes on, not just public sector, but private sector. So we've been trying as best we can to anticipate where those gaps are going to be and take steps to fill them. Again, this is a work in progress, but it is a substantial start, about 2% of our GDP. It's a significant amount of money being put directly into services for people and making sure that the liquidity issues, the cash flow issues we heard from businesses is addressed. At this stage, in March, I think we're pretty comfortable with where we're at. But we do know the important work that that teachers and other workers in the K-12 system do every day as part of our community cohesion, and those are going to be critical issues as we go forward. And we'll be working with Minister Fleming's working with the BC Teachers Federation, CUPE, and other workers within the K-12 system, as well as school boards, trustees, and superintendents. So we want to have a comprehensive package, sector by sector, and that's what the Recovery Task Force will be focusing on, is where do we go from here? As I said in my opening remarks, the public wants to know day to day how we're managing the issues as they emerge. Minister Dix and Dr. Henry and her entire network of public health officials are doing an extraordinary job, as are those frontline workers, whether it's on the docks, driving trucks, making sure people are getting the groceries they need, making sure, of course, that our healthcare system is functioning and that we're taking care of the most vulnerable. All of that has to be put in and overlaid over top of what are we going to do next month and the month after that. And I want British Columbians to take comfort that we're dealing with the day-to-day, but we're also looking with a view to where are we going to be in May, where are we going to be in June, where are we going to be in July. And that's what they would expect us to do.
Vaughn Palmer. Go ahead, Vaughn.
Minister James, the Premier said last week that provincial revenues have already fallen off a cliff, and I just wondered if you've got any sense of what that's doing to your revenue projections in general. And this $5 billion that you've announced today, does that just ride on top of the budget that you tabled a month ago? Do you, the parts that are revenue side come out of revenue, and the parts that are spending side go on top of the spending numbers you've already given us?
I'll start there, Vaughn. You are quite right. This is an addition to the provincial budget that has been tabled. This is not utilizing those dollars. This is additional funding for COVID to make sure we have the supports in place. We believe that's critical, and as you say, the tax measures come out of the government's bottom line. The additional spending measures will come out of this additional supplementary vote that will be introduced later today in the legislature. When it comes to revenues and government's revenues, there is no question that we are impacted, as every jurisdiction across the world is impacted. Our focus right now is making sure people get the supports they need, whether it's healthcare, whether it's income supports, whether it's business support to defer payments, to make sure that we can get through this crisis. So that's our current focus right now. We will have more details as the next couple of months go along, as this fiscal year closes off and we move into the next fiscal year. There'll obviously be a full economic statement that will come forward at the first quarterly, which is usually the end of August, beginning of September, and that'll give us more idea. But there is no question, whether we're talking about a growth in our province, whether we're talking about exports, imports, it doesn't matter, tourism, every sector is impacted. This is going to be a very challenging time, and that's why it's important that right now we're focused on getting the supports out there and helping people get through these difficulties.
Before the next one comes on, Vaughn, I would also just add that the notion of stimulus at a time when the economy is shrinking is something that you always look at, but we're seeing rapid changes in the workplace, rapid changes within the North American economy and everything that entails. So stimulus needs to be something we're looking at in a month's time. Today, we need to make sure we've got cash in people's pockets, we've got cash flow corrective measures in place for businesses, and that was job one. Minister James and her team, working with the business community, with labor, with not-for-profits, put this package together, and there'll be more to come as needed in the months ahead.
We're going to Binder Sajjan next.
Hi there. I'm just wondering about this $1,000 credit. I know of a lot of people who are worried about how they are going to pay the rent, and I'm wondering, do you have a timeline? Can people expect this money before the end of the month? And what will the application process be?
We will be setting up the systems as quickly as we can, so we will get that system up and running, and hopefully the funding flowing by May. It's got to take a month to be able to get those systems in place, but we will, as I said, be working quickly to be able to get those resources to individuals. It will be an application process that will be very straightforward. Basically, if you have applied and you're receiving EI, the expanded EI criteria, so not simply people eligible for EI, but as I mentioned, people who aren't eligible, parents who are at home with their children because of schools being closed or childcare, self-employed. You will simply be able to apply, show that you've applied for EI and reach that criteria, and then we'll be able to send the check out. So we're looking to simplify this as much as possible. We'll look at how we make sure that people are aware of how they can apply so they can get those applications in as quickly as they can as well.
We're going to take a few questions from the room, starting with Tanya Fletcher.
Premier, or maybe both of you can answer this, but talking about small businesses, looking at this timeline, many that I was chatting with, for example, in downtown Vancouver, they've shut down, they're complying with the orders, many are delivering or takeout only, and some are wondering, they're teetering on the edge of, do we shut down entirely and lay off all our staff and encourage them to go on EI and apply for these benefits, or do we try and stay open, bare bones, hanging from day to day, and try to stay afloat with this help? What's your message to them?
Well, it's a difficult message, and it's a mixed message. We have clear directives from the Public Health Office through Dr. Henry that there are those businesses and those operations within the economy that we need to keep going. Childcare was one we talked about last week. There was concern in that sector, legitimate confusion about what does this mean for us. We need to make sure that those frontline workers, whether they be in healthcare, delivery of goods and services essential to the functioning of communities, food and other necessities, we need to make sure that their kids are cared for so that they can continue to come to work. And so that means we're asking the child care sector to figure out how we do that. And it's not an edict at this point, it's how do we do that together. Similarly, with small businesses that are looking at their walk-in traffic dropping off as you would expect, who do they keep? I've talked to a couple business people who said I'm keeping on a group of staff because they've been with me for a decade and a half or more, but I'm saying to my other staff, I want you back, but we don't have enough business to keep you going. That's a difficult message for an employer to give. That's a difficult message for a government to give to the small businesses that are the backbone of our communities right across the province. But that's the way it's going to have to be. We put in place these liquidity or these cash flow solutions so that businesses are not dealing with the double whammy of not having people coming in the door and also having to meet their regular bills, as it were. So we're pushing those down the road. We're putting in place incentives to keep them going, and that's the best we can do today. And we'll continue to develop these programs as need emerges. And there will be plenty. I don't doubt that. But we're asking for people to do the best they can, to depend on the safety nets that they put in place, and go from there.
Next, Leslie.
Oh, Premier, Ontario Premier Ford this morning announced a shutdown of all non-essential services effective midnight tonight. What's your view of that? Where is BC in corresponding to something like that, do you think?
Well, we're working, as I said, we talk regularly, premiers across the country. There's a First Minister's call later this afternoon I'll be participating in with the Prime Minister and his team. And we're sharing best practices at all times. And we have, from the beginning, you'll know that it was January when public health officials and the Ministry of Health and Minister Dix started talking about COVID-19 as a problem that may well make its way to British Columbia. So we've been doing work for some months now to prepare. I think Minister Dix talked today about the capacity within the acute care system that exists today. It's extraordinary what we've been able to accomplish in a short period of time, anticipating increased numbers of cases that will require acute care. But that modeling is being done, and there'll be more to say about that later in the week. But when it comes to a lockdown or a shutdown, unprecedented in my experience that our borders are closed to anyone but essential personnel or essential individuals. Our economy is grinding to a slowdown at the direction of our health officials, but also from workers who are saying, I better heed this advice and self-isolate. I better do what I'm being asked to do to contribute to us getting through this and flattening the curve. So saying lockdown, saying shutdown is really easy to do, but it's difficult in reality. And the list of exemptions in California, for example, is not unlike the list of exemptions that we have in place here today. So I would rather than get caught up on how we're going to say to business, how we're going to say to workers, how we're going to say to the broader economy, this is how we're going forward, and we use terms like lockdown and shutdown, that, in my opinion, will create more confusion rather than less. We're working sector by sector, making sure that those individuals critically important to the delivery of health services to people that are vulnerable, which is our highest priority right now. We need to make sure that there's a clear understanding. We do need childcare workers to be in place, and we're grateful that they're stepping up. We do need people working in our retail sector to make sure we're getting goods and services to people that desperately need them, particularly those healthcare workers that are on the front lines, putting themselves at risk. All of that requires a methodical, thoughtful, science-based approach, and it may well be satisfying to say we're going to shut something down, but we need to make sure we're doing it in a way that makes sense. One thing we've already been working on is WorkSafe BC is working with the healthcare professionals across the province to make sure that work sites are safe. How can we make them safer? Those types of initiatives are all useful and will be able to inform us in the months ahead. But I don't want to rule out anything less, having given you that long-winded answer. But we need to be thoughtful about this, and we need to be driven by the science and the direction we get from public health officials, and also the willingness of the private sector to be able to comply with the delivery of these very critical services that we're going to need in the days and weeks ahead.
And Mary, do you have one?
I'm just wondering, Premier, if the province is planning at all to follow Vancouver's lead and enforce the social distancing rules. And also, just another question, I mean, it does affect British Columbia, but President Donald Trump is talking about 15 days, re-looking at all these, the shutdown of the economy down there. I'm just wondering what your thoughts, because anything that happens south of the border we've seen a dramatic impact.
Yeah. Well, well, let's start with Vancouver. Vancouver, like every other municipality in British Columbia, although it has a charter of its own, is guided by provincial emergency legislation. So we believe that there is appropriate authority in place at the provincial level that will be equitably distributed as needed across the province. If City of Vancouver or other municipalities want to encourage more physical distancing, social distancing, that's great. But we have the wherewithal to enforce. I think Dr. Henry certainly does, as does Minister Farnworth. We're asking people to just do the right thing, and the vast majority of people are. It's difficult. I represent the west coast of Vancouver Island, and I heard from local representatives in my community that French Beach and Jordan River and China Beach were filled with people this weekend. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon. And with all of the anxiety that people are experiencing right now, a walk along the beaches can be very restorative. I wanted to do the same thing myself. But that's not necessarily the best outcome for people if they're not staying at an appropriate distance away from each other. But that was putting a strain on, in my community, on the local volunteer fire departments in Shirley and Otter Point and out to Port Renfrew, and again, raising unnecessary anxiety. So to people I say, if you've got time and you want to go for a walk, try and do it in your local community. Do it without interacting with other people, and I think we'll all be good. But the challenge for the economy, and the United States is an enormous economic force in the world, and very much important to us in British Columbia. And that's why when we were insisting upon border closings at the Washington state border, it was to not to keep goods and services out, but to keep potential transmission of the disease from what was at that time a very critical situation in Washington state from migrating into the lower mainland. But so that was a discussion between the federal governments and both sides trying to figure out a way to keep the economy going and also do what's best for public health. And that's what we'll continue to do. President Trump, I'm sure, will have much more to say in the weeks ahead, and we'll do our best to react to that.
Shannon. I think this is going to be for the finance minister, but I think it was last week Dr. Bonnie Henry acknowledged that BC has two public health emergencies going on right now, both COVID-19 and the opioid overdose crisis. Do we have any information at this point in time about what kind of funding the province might be making available to continue to support or possibly expand the efforts it's already directed towards that crisis, given what we're also dealing with now?
And I would add to that, not just the opioid crisis and COVID-19, but also strains on people's mental health. This is a big, big challenge. One of the reasons we established the first Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions when we were sworn in as a government was because we had been hearing for a long, long time that that was an area of public health that was being overlooked and neglected, and we wanted to put more emphasis on that. At a time like this, when people are uncertain about their economic future, uncertain about their personal health and well-being, anxiety levels go up, depression goes up, and all of these issues need to be addressed, and we're doing our level best having a minister dedicated to that, to work with public health officials to address that mental health component. And with respect to the other programs, I'll let Carole answer that.
That's the reason we have the $1.7 billion set aside. Those dollars are set aside to be drawn on for exactly those kinds of purposes, for addiction supports, for mental health supports, for women fleeing violence. Those issues, again, we need to make sure the supports are in place. Support for people on income assistance and disabilities as they face additional pressures. So that pot of money will be drawn on as the needs arise, as programs are put in place, as supports are put in place. And again, that's part of the value of putting that fund aside, is that we then have the flexibility to go where the need is. And again, as times change, as we see things continue to evolve, we may need to put additional supports in place in that area as well. But that's to cover the broad social services that will be needed and supports that will be needed in the province.
We have time for two more questions. Adrian Blanc first, and then we're going to Lisa Eustace.
Hello, question for Minister of Finance. With large deficit looming in BC and Canada and the USA, a recession is pretty much a given. What are your analysts forecasting regarding the likelihood of a worldwide depression?
I think there is no question that we are going to see global challenges. This will not be unique to British Columbia. British Columbia is a small open economy, and we will be impacted just as every other jurisdiction across the country and across the globe will be. As I said earlier, we are focused right now on support for individuals, for healthcare, health and safety. We will spend what is needed to be able to address that, but we also recognize that we need to start looking at the recovery end, and that's why we put dollars aside again for recovery, to be able to start looking at what kinds of initiatives will need to be put in place. So we're paying attention to both. On the details of the economy and how hard we will be hit, no one can predict at this point where the pandemic will evolve, the timelines that we're looking at. You're continuing to see growth projections drop for every jurisdiction across the world. So we will have economic statements when we come to public accounts in the summer and when we come to the first quarterly. But I think it's clear there is going to be a huge economic impact on everyone across the globe.
And I would just, sorry, I would just add to that why it's so important that governments work with the private sector, with employers and employees to make sure that there is a recovery plan in place. There is no doubt that our economy today is not what we had forecast it to be 4 weeks ago. And we don't know where it's going to be 4 weeks from now, but we do know that we need to prepare for coming out of this. Dr. Henry says repeatedly, whenever I'm talking to her, this is for now, not forever. And I think the public needs to have comfort that government's looking at what happens when we come out the other side of this, and are we making plans, are we putting aside resources so that we can kickstart and stimulate that economic activity when the time is right. And that's what we're doing, working with the private sector, working with organized labor, working with not-for-profits, putting together this task force so that we can indeed lay out with confidence to the public that there's a plan going forward, and then they can get.
You mentioned will not get evicted, but I can hear the screams through the phone line of people saying, but how does that help me now? Do I ensure that I'm not getting evicted and ensure that they're going to get cash in their pockets from people who have been laid off, who live paycheck to paycheck?
Well, a couple of things, and I'll let Carole come in for a bit of it as well. We will have a plan for renters on Wednesday after Cabinet, so we'll have more details at that time. We do understand that this is that we're mid-month right now and coming into April. We want to make sure people are comforted that because of this epidemic, the pandemic, they will not lose their homes. This is critically important. I want to reinforce that. But we need to make sure we're laying out a framework that makes sense to renters, makes sense to landlords. If there is relief on mortgages for landlords, that should then translate into relief for tenants who will not have to meet the mortgage payment for their landlord this particular month. So we're trying to make sure that this is seamless. But as I said, that we're building these programs as we go, and we're taking best practices. We're working cooperatively. Government of Alberta, we had high-level discussions between both finance departments there so that we are making sure we're doing everything we can to put in place programs that are going to make sense, not just today, but next week and the week after that.
Just to add on, if you look at each of the specific programs we've outlined today as part of our action plan, I think it's important to remember that these also go in concert with the federal government work. Earlier there was a question around small business. Small business will also have the opportunity to be able to tap into the loan program that's in place for the federal government. So we're easing the pressure, giving them cash flow right away by taking the payments away until the end of September. They can also then access the federal program. For tenants, as the Premier said, Wednesday we'll have more details around evictions. We are putting together a program for people who need support with their rent as quickly as we can, looking at whether we can use existing programs like, as I mentioned earlier, the Seniors Supplement Program or the Working Supplement Program for tenants. The $1,000 payment for those who are on EI. Federal government has a payment coming to people in April. So again, looking at how we can coordinate these to provide the maximum support for individuals who we know really need help today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Just a reminder to gallery folks in the room going forward, being in the room does not guarantee you a question. It's less so that encourage